Hello, my name is Laura Drinkwater and I am the Head of Art at MEA Central. MEA Central is a relatively new school. We opened in 2017 on the borders between Longsight and Fallowfield in the centre of Manchester. We are a mixed secondary academy with over 50% EAL, significantly higher than average levels of pupil premium, and significantly higher proportion of students with SEN. Interestingly, we are located about a quarter of a mile from Manchester Grammar School, and when we first opened back in 2017, all the founding staff were very much on board with the leadership intention that our students would leave school with as good an opportunity as students at Manchester Grammar. Now, obviously, they're a very different context to us. So in terms of how we set about trying to achieve that, cultural capital was at the centre of this plan, of this strategy to help our students. Of course, we have plans about helping them achieve the highest possible grades, but actually if we want our students to compete and be equal to their peers, they need to have confidence and be able to talk at ease with their peers, particularly if they end up going into further education where they'll be around people from all sorts of different types of backgrounds. In terms of how we started, so we have our PHSE curriculum is actually called Social and Cultural Capital. That's sort of how we branded it initially. The curriculum has been written and created as a collaboration between subject experts. So rather than one person creating this curriculum, it was a huge piece of collaborative work that relied upon the knowledge of subject experts. The reason we have done that is because to plug cultural capital gaps is not just about telling a story once. It needs to be embedded in different contexts and in different subject areas. So, for example, in terms of what the English department identified as a gap was sort of mythological references, biblical references. At MEA Central, the predominant practice religion is Islam, so we found that biblical references were often being missed when they were reading books and that sort of thing. So, when Year 7, when they go through the cultural capital curriculum, they will go through things like the story of Achilles, and they will understand the reference of something being your Achilles heel. Similarly, they'll go through some biblical stories, so Adam and Eve is a really important one. However, if you just explain that story to students in one lesson, that is not enough to plug that cultural gap. And this is where the collaboration with different departments is really important. So, obviously, as an art teacher, if I know that my Year 7 students have, last term they have done Adam and Eve, and I then show them Magritte's painting, The Son of Man, we can obviously start to unpick that in a much more interesting way, because with the apple in front of the face, the apple is obviously a really important symbol, a biblical symbol. That means that our conversations about it can be much more in depth. So rather than just having a conversation about, oh, the apple is in his way or the apple has fallen from the sky, we can start to talk about the apple as a much more in-depth symbol and a much more meaningful symbol. The social and cultural capital curriculum has really heavy emphasis on inference, and the art curriculum also has inference is the key skill for Year 7. Now you might think, well, that's a higher level skill, but actually getting students just talking and being increasing their confidence in looking at an image and offering up an interpretation, that is how you get that really lovely classroom dynamic and that safe space where students feel comfortable talking about and discussing their ideas. So although we do have a separate cultural capital curriculum where they have 2 lessons over our 2-week timetable, so that's how often they would have those, it's how it's then reinforced not only English, but also across all subjects, particularly art and history, I would say, is where you can go over and embed further these important cultural concepts. In terms of advice on how, this is still a work in progress. Like I say, we've been open since 2017. It's an interesting time for us because obviously we're on the brink of a new academic year where we've all been through this, this continuing global pandemic, and the barriers that our students face are ever changing. So at MEA Central, we're all about identifying barriers for our students and then finding ways to overcome them in different ways. And we're going to have to get to know our students all over again. And we know that we'll need to have a massive focus on reading in order to develop their confidence. And then the cultural capital curriculum will kickstart, we're expecting, after about half a term. So we'll do some more reading intervention, and then we will kickstart the social and cultural capital curriculum again. This curriculum runs through Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4. And as I said, I think the strength of it is the fact that it was not just written by one or two people. It's heavily reliant upon subject expertise and us being trusted as subjects in our as experts in our different areas to identify not only just the most common misconceptions or the most commonly overlooked concepts, but also the ones that have the sort of the greatest leverage points. So like that example of the apple being a symbol, that's a really useful one to go over because, apples come up in all sorts of different things, like the company Apple. There's a reason why they've used the apple. So finding concepts or even just small ideas that can be repeated in English, in religious studies, in art, in technology, so that students become familiar with them. Like I said, if you go through a story or a theory with a class once, they are unlikely to remember it then. They obviously, in terms of it going into long-term memory rather than short-term memory, they will need to revisit these concepts, not just once or twice, but and not even just in the main curriculum, but through extracurricular as well. Obviously, for us as art teachers, we are reliant upon things like going outside, going to galleries, working with artists, in order to help our students. It's not just about them learning westernised stories that we think are important, but also allowing them to understand who they are and to reflect more on their own identity. Many of our students come from quite complex families, perhaps where previous generations have lived in different areas or even lived in different countries. So one thing I'm really conscious of with the cultural capital is sort of avoiding this sort of white saviour complex, which is something I think as a predominantly white staff we need to be very aware of, is creating a school environment where it's not just about identifying the things you need to talk about Western art or to talk about predominantly Western concepts, but actually to make it as inclusive as possible and to include reference to different types of people and people who come from similar backgrounds to the students, so that they see themselves as being in a actually a really fortuitous position. So for example, lots of our students do speak multiple languages, and that's a massive advantage, and to sort of help them acknowledge their strengths and the things that actually set them apart from students who have gone to Manchester Grammar and who have gone to schools or are from they've grown up with privilege that they have not themselves got. Again, this all comes back to confidence. So for me, cultural capital is not just about ticking boxes like, oh, we've taken them to the theatre, tick. We've taken them to a football match, tick. And that is an aspect of it. So giving them experiences that they may not have the opportunity to have at home. But for me, it's more about the confidence that comes from having practical experiences. So being able to say, oh yeah, I think I've seen something similar to that, or oh, I think I might recognise that. It's a bit like something I saw in this lesson. It's not about creating a school full of sort of staunch academics. It's just about, you know, developing students who are developing a really clear sense of self. Obviously, that's not something that you can achieve just at secondary school, but kind of equipping them with the confidence to feel comfortable in their own shoes. And we find students who are a bit more content in themselves when placed in context with different types of young people and adults, being able to communicate clearly with adults, then being a lot more at ease with those experiences and far less intimidated. As we know, when you leave school, yes, you obviously have your piece of paper with the grades that you got on it, but actually it's the personal skills and how cultural capital can enforce that that's most important. So I do feel very fortunate to be in a school, in a new school, where we are constantly developing and reviewing what is best for our students. And we know our students very well, especially those of us who've been there since the beginning when we only had 1 year group. So it's about continuing to understand those young people. Like I said, we're in unprecedented times and they will have been through significant experiences during their time at home, and we will continue to adapt based upon us getting to know them further, and especially with our new students, getting to know them as quickly as possible when they return.